Aquarius, welcome to your Geoscope for the lunar eclipse in Sagittarius. I hope this finds you well. If you are a regular subscriber to my newsletter, welcome back to the second part of your extended forecast. If you are a YouTube subscriber and you want to have access to my astrology forecasts, then consider signing up to my website. Just subscribe. Go to astrologysphere.com/subscribe. It's free, and you'll just get a newsletter twice a month, and it'll also give you access to some kind of forecasts and so on that I don't have in the public domain. So what can we expect from this particular full moon eclipse? Let's find out. So I have had a Jasper sitting on the cards just to sort of earth the energy a little bit, because this is really a kind of an astrological oracle, but it's to do with or predominantly about the four elements. So that's why I quite like it for doing the slightly less philosophical kind of readings, and for the more everyday practical matters, which are nonetheless important to us. They might not necessarily be significant in the greater scheme of things within our lives, but then again sometimes they are. So let's see what wisdom, guidance and lessons Aquarius can expect at this particular full moon lunar eclipse. So I think that's enough shuffling. Let's cut the deck. And just to say, you don't have to use cards, when it comes to geomancy. I just like to use cards because they're quite visual, and I like they're quite sort of tangible. But you can use dice, you can use just a piece of paper and a pen. There's lots of ways of kind of getting your geomantic figures. So your first quadrigram out is Letitia, and that's a really positive and uplifting geomantic figure to have in the first position, which is kind of you and your disposition at the start of this this particular lunar phase. So this is kind of almost a 2-week forecast, you could say, between the full moon when the eclipse happens and then the next new moon, which begins a fresh 6-month cycle at the solar eclipse in Cancer. So during this full moon phase, you're really focused on your happiness. You're focused on cultivating more joy, more kind of positive vibes basically in your life, which really kind of jives with the whole 5th house emphasis of this eclipse for you, which is where the sun and the moon are going to be. They're going to be across the 5th and the 11th houses. Wow, your second quadrigram is Acquisitio, which is equally positive. So this is Jupiter in its day rulership of Sagittarius. This is Jupiter in its night rulership of Pisces, which is water, and now we have Jupiter in the fire sign of Sagittarius. Again, super positive. So that's already, 2 really auspicious quadrigrams coming out. So Acquisitio is about gain. And of course, gain can take many forms. It could be more happiness, more joy, more vitality. It could be more love. It could be more money. It could be more work. But put in your 4th house, we are talking about, potentially an expanded family. So you could be thinking about having children, and that's how the 5th house could work. You could be thinking about having a family or expanding your family. It could also be about buying a new house. Are you upsizing, for example? Are you buying your first home for the family? That's another way that this could work. It's also to do with gains through family, which is very often inheritances. So it could be that you kind of come into money now as a result of a legacy. So that's really positive. Then we've got Puella in your 7th house. So this is about relationships and how apt. We're talking about the 7th house, which is about significant others. Again, this might link to the 5th house, which is where the sun will be, the sun in Gemini. So this is saying that you will be at this particular full moon phase, this lunar eclipse, you'll be quite focused on creating harmony within relationships, or re-establishing harmony if they've been out of balance. Now, it is worth pointing out that this is Venus in Libra, and Venus will be traveling with the Sun at this particular lunar eclipse. She will still be retrograde in Gemini, so I do suggest that if you haven't already, that you watch my Venus retrograde video, because there may be some themes from that which are basically activated at this particular full moon. So that's just something to bear in mind. Wow, Letitia again. So you really are focused on creating more happiness for yourself. And that's not just on a personal level, but also on a career level. So it's possible that what you're trying to do is you're trying to sort of marry, you know, what you do for a living and kind of who you are together, so that you almost kind of, you're living your kind of most perfect, authentic life where everything is sort of in alignment. But anyway, we'll get into this in more detail once I do the conversion. So I'm just going to pause the video for a sec while I create the other quadrograms to populate this sheet. Welcome back, Aquarius. So I have done your conversion. Here's the table. If you're interested in trying out Geomancy for yourself, you can download this conversion table for free from my website. Just pop to astrologysphere.com and then have a look on the front page. There is a link to a Geomancy page and you can download it from there. A heads up though, I haven't used the house allocation system that I've put into this conversion table. I just used the consecutive house numbering because it's the simplest way to learn. But I'm using the Golden Dawn system, which puts the mothers in the cardinal houses and then the daughters in the succedent, and then following that with the nieces in the cadent houses. So quite an interesting looking reading, Aquarius. Let's get into it in a bit more detail. So here's your casting cloth. I've set out all the quadrograms in their correct places. So you'll see that the original 4 quadrograms, the mothers, are still in the cardinal houses, and those are kind of highlighting these sort of major themes in the, in the 4 main areas of your life, which is, self and personal self-expression, as well as physical appearance, home, family, and kind of origins or inheritances, and then we've got significant others, marriages, unions, and partnerships here, and we've got vocation, public life, success, fame, career, all those good things in the 10th. So if we look to start with at where the sun and the moon are, and then how this interacts with the rest of the chart, we find the 5th house. We've got Rubeus in the 5th house, which is so interesting. So this is kind of Mars in the sign of Scorpio. So this is its night rulership in Scorpio, and this is basically, this system was developed at the same time as the original essential dignities that are used in medieval astrology and also in things like Horary astrology, where Mars, basically all the 7 original planets, the visible planets, each had 2 signs that they co-ruled, except for the sun and the moon, which were considered to be too superior to have 2. They only had the 1, Leo and Cancer. So so this was Mars in its night rulership, and this is about passion, because Scorpio is a water sign, so you can imagine when you add heat to water you get steam. And it's interesting that we've got this Rubeus happening in the 5th house, which can be to do with passion, it can be to do with love affairs. So this is the kind of the early heady days when you first meet somebody and sparks fly, basically. So it does seem to kind of emphasize that love relationships or kind of passion, and this could also be passion for a particular art form, for example. It could be a very tumultuous relationship that you have with a child, but there's definitely passion here. And in the system of Geomancy, this is not always considered to be a good thing, because it's almost as though it's water out of balance. So I'm going to just read you the keywords for Rubeus so that you can have a think about what, how this might express itself in your particular situation. Because of course this is, if we think that this is you, Aquarius. Then we're going Pisces, and then we're going Aries, Taurus, Gemini. So this is where the Sun and Venus will be. Venus, romantic relationships will be, and the Moon will be in the 11th. So I mean, even if we think about a solar eclipse, I mean a lunar eclipse itself, it's essentially when the Sun and the Moon are on opposite sides of the Earth. So they're in a kind of axis, a polar axis, at either end of the spectrum, and that's why they're in opposite signs of the zodiac. But this is when the Sun, by shining on the Earth, casts a shadow, or kind of a shadow, sort of casts a red shadow onto the Moon. So this is the Sun, in a way, not obscuring the light of the Moon, but kind of doing it via a third party, and that might also be important. It may be that somehow your romantic situation is affected by a third party, somebody in the middle who's either blocking kind of like things from flowing, or maybe perhaps trying to prevent a not so great situation, so interfering, but maybe in a way that is trying to protect you. So this could kind of go either way. So Rubeus is about, it's red, it's burning, it's passion, it's fire, in the sense of fiery passion. It's anger, fierceness, danger, violence, vice, vengefulness, zealousness, and deep involvement. So it is associated with the color dark red or magenta, and it's considered, the quadrigram is considered to be a chalice turned upside down. So I think this is quite apt in the sense that I do get into the myth of the Grail in my extended Venus retrograde forecast video. So if you aren't already a member of my website, you might want to subscribe so that you can watch that video, because I do think that this is going to be a big theme for Mars during its time in Pisces and during the square to Venus, because of course Venus during its retrograde is basically bouncing from squares between Neptune on the one hand and Mars until they come together in their conjunction. So Mars is almost there, but not quite yet. They're both in this house, Neptune and Mars, and both are affecting this retrograde Venus. Or no, I should say that they're in Pisces. So Pisces is in your second house. Sorry. So that's where Mars kind of is astrologically. What am I trying to say? Essentially, this period during Venus retrograde is sort of all about the masculine and the feminine aspects of ourselves, which could end up being split into two people. This idea of the sacred feminine and the sort of divine masculine, divine feminine. That they're kind of at odds with each other at the moment in terms of energy and expression, and so it's possible that there's stuff to work out between you and another, which gets highlighted at this particular full moon phase. So the emphasis on vice, which comes up with Rubeus in the 5th house, also draws our attention to the issue of addiction. And of course here, if we think about the tarot card, the devil, it's really about too much of a good thing. And this is something that I bring up in my Venus retrograde video. We can become addicted to being in love. We can also become addicted to being in relationships that are not necessarily good for us, because there's a lot of drama. So it makes us feel alive, basically. So, this is something to consider, because if we look over here to the 12th house, we've got the same quadrigram, Rubeus. So there could be a link here. You need to perhaps, I think what this is drawing your attention to is that when it comes to dynamics, particularly with children or with anything that brings you pleasure, that you also need to be thinking about the subconscious payoff, where you subconsciously might be using these either to numb out, for example, from not dealing with other more painful situations, or where you might be, this is the house of self-undoing as well. So it can also be where we can sometimes get unstuck, or we can sabotage ourselves, as constantly being drawn to relationships, for example, or situations, shall we say, situationships, or repeating circumstances where there may be high passion and drama, but it doesn't necessarily always end well, and it isn't always necessarily positive feeling. So just something to bear in mind there. But that aside, what we need to sort of draw our attention to is, so we've got this T square, and this is sitting across your 5th and your 11th houses to your 2nd house. So it's kind of drawing your attention to this idea of self-worth. I think, if we look at the 7th house, we've got the same quadrogram here. So I think there's a link here between self-worth and committed or long-term relationships. So again, I think this links to the 5th house, this idea that, if you want to have children, you need to sort of be in some kind of, ideally, you need to be in a kind of long-term partnership where the two of you can share child-rearing duties and so on. And then on the other hand, if we are talking about some kind of creative partnership, for example, with the emphasis on the 5th house, such as a manager or an agent, then you also need to make sure that it's a fair arrangement when it comes to money and contracts and so on, and also that whatever you're working on has legs to sort of be lucrative. That's another way of looking at this. Or if we are talking about romantic relationships, then you could see this as being about knowing your worth, so having a clear sense of what you deserve and how you want to be treated, because this will allow things to move from those kind of initial stages of passion into something more long term. So those are themes that are kind of coming up there. And then if we have a look at where Chiron and Black Moon Lilith are sitting, because of course they're making a trine to the moon, that would be in Aries. So that would be, if this is Aquarius, then this is Pisces and this is Aries, so 3rd house. So again, as I say, emphasizing this idea of healing through perhaps conversations, because this is 3rd house, so it is self-expression, but also potentially from learning lessons. So seeing things in a different way, being open to different perspectives, being open to what other parties have to say, seeing things from their point of view. So that might be a way to heal relationships at this time. But the emphasis in your outcome seems to be on fated or kind of karmic cycles. So here we've got the tail of the dragon, which is the south node, and this is what is emphasized at any lunar eclipse. So we are talking about potentially the end of some kind of karmic cycle, a lesson learned, and then this is a new beginning, so a fresh cycle starting, which is where you're heading towards. So I think this will be probably kicked off by the solar eclipse in Cancer that happens later in June, because that will start a new 6-month cycle that will take us to the end of December 2020. Now, part of this lesson, I think, is to do with restriction or limitations. So it could be about saying no, and this, I think, is where the kind of self-worth issue kind of comes in, and also potentially the issue around addictions. So being able to say no to what is not good for us, or to say no to our own self-sabotaging behavior if we keep repeating the same mistakes. That's one way to look at this energy. The other way could be quite literally that this has to do with the restrictions of lockdown, not being able to travel, to see somebody, to go on holiday, to be with a loved one. That could be another way that this works. But then we need to see it in the light of some kind of karmic lesson that we learned from being separate. I'll read you some of the keywords so that this can kind of spark off some ideas for you. So Karse is also about imprisonment, isolation, delays, binding confinement. So in other words, literally being confined in some way through a contract, for example. Borders, locks, limits, restraint, and restrictions. So as I say, I think that sometimes people will view commitment in that way. So that's something to bear in mind, especially given what a freedom-loving sign you are, Aquarius. It could be that on some level you are afraid of commitment, and are being tied down, and that's why you keep getting involved in these types of dramas when it comes to romantic relationships. That way, you know, there might be high intensity, but they don't last, so there's no sort of danger of you being tied down in any way. Something to think about, particularly with this 12th house emphasis. The other way that this could work is, as I say, it could be restrictions, so it could be lockdown or not being able to travel. It could also be contracts, so it may have to do with 7th house matters in the sense of business, for example, or a marriage contract. I'm just trying to see what else, whether there are any kind of overlaps here that I've missed. The only thing I will say is that we've got Albus in the 8th house, which is often related to the 7th and to the 6th and to the 2nd. And Albus here can be, it's very often about purity or a fresh start, so a clean slate, a blank sheet of paper. So that could sort of indicate either a rewriting of contracts, so maybe renegotiating something, or it could mean starting fresh when it comes to kind of not just shared assets, so, you know, trust, intimacy, but also shared possessions, which, you know, happens often in a marriage or a business partnership. But it can also have to do with this idea of how can I put this? Sort of seeing things from like a fresh perspective, or kind of pressing the reset button. You know, that might be something that needs to happen here. You know, when it comes to your boundaries, for example, maybe you need to sort of rethink who you let in, or whether you're perhaps overly protective. So in that sense, Corsair might be about your boundaries between sort of, you know, you and other people. So it's something else, food for thought. But I think those are kind of your overall themes. So we're ending one karmic cycle. We are moving towards the start of a new cycle for you. So overall positive. I just think you need to either think about what you need to leave behind, and Saturn's tour through Capricorn may serve to, as a time period, may be significant. So you might want to go back and have a look at what happened during Saturn's transit through Capricorn, which was kind of up until March. I think Saturn was in Capricorn for about 2.5 years. Saturn is currently retrograde and is moving back into Capricorn briefly, I think in July. So this issue, I think, will probably get naturally highlighted for you at that, you know, at that period. But I think overall, a positive reading. Let's not forget that we've got happiness and joy, Letitia, here in your 1st and 10th house. So I think you are moving to a happier place. I think what it is going to require, though, is a little bit of a reset when it comes to, you know, 5th house matters in particular, as well as your perspective. So I hope that's been helpful. If it has, I would really appreciate if you hit the like button. If you want to see more geoscopes like this, I do plan to do more in the future, particularly through my YouTube channel. So just hit the subscribe button, because then you won't kind of miss out on you know, whatever's coming up if I post something new. And otherwise, I'm wishing you all the best. Many full moon blessings to you, Aquarius, and I'll catch you again in 2 weeks for my main eclipse forecast.